It's Chaplain, hoping all is well with you and yours. Today, we are joined by my brother Nick Davis, CEO of Grid Market. Nick, how are you doing today, man?
Living the dream.
Hear it, hear it, hear it. I want to start off with this amazing concept about energy democracy. You've spoken about consumers not just being folks who are consuming energy, but also becoming producers of energy. Talk to us a bit about what inspires your passion for energy democracy.
Yeah. So when you look at kind of the root of our economy, how people communicate, our general dependencies in this society, energy is really at the core of a lot of those things. And since I would say Thomas Edison started deploying mini grids in New York,
Mhm.
and he was the first to do it, energy's been really dealt with the same way. You get big centralized power plants, and they're pushing electrons through wires, or they're
Mhm.
pushing gas through pipes, or various things through pipes that then get burned at a power plant and then pushed to you as a consumer.
Right.
You've got, especially across the U.S., these regulated monopolies that are called utilities. There are over 1,200 of them in the U.S.
Mhm.
and they get to do whatever they want. There's a little bit of state regulation, but they tell you how much you're going to pay. They tell you when they're going to upgrade their systems to accommodate, more load growth, we call it, so more
Right.
electrical users. Um, and you're really at their mercy at the end of the day. And for the last 40 years, it hasn't been that bad because electricity prices haven't risen that much.
Mhm.
But if anyone's looked at their electricity bill, or their energy bills in general over
Come
the last
on.
maybe 3-4 years,
Right.
you know, we're feeling it as consumers from a residential perspective. And if you're, a commercial or industrial user,
Mhm.
and if you're in certain locations, if you're in like California, for instance,
Right.
I know electricity consumers that their rates went from 8 cents a kilowatt hour to around 35 in a 3-year
Goodness.
span.
Goodness.
So, from an affordability perspective, it'll kill your business.
Yeah.
It'll put you underwater personally if you don't have shock absorbers for those changes. So,
Right.
you know, when you look at a decade or so ago, doing on-site energy work and being in control of your own energy systems, be it batteries or solar power, fuel cells, other things that are out there, being energy efficient, having EV cars that can communicate with the grid. These were all
Right.
nice to haves. Maybe you save a
Uh-huh.
few bucks. Maybe you're passionate about the environment. The reality is, right now, in order to insulate from really the biggest price hikes in history for these kinds of commodities, you have no choice. You have to start managing your own systems, and
Right.
you have to see kind of the most that you can do at your own home, and you've got to be a little more proactive.
Mhm.
I thought we lived in a world where everyone was really going to have to be a mini expert in their own right.
Sure.
Then, yeah, enter AI though, and the reality is, like, you're gonna have AI agents that can optimize your energy consumption and tell you what kind of solar power or battery storage to put at your house, how that can
Right.
interact with the vehicle, et cetera. So it's all becoming easier, fortunately, and not everyone has to become an energy PhD.
Oh, that's real comforting to hear for sure. I'm thinking about the narrative around AI though, particularly with its energy consumption. I remember going to like a conversation that was happening at a local chamber of commerce, and the representative from Gemini was talking about it, and I was just like, hey, why can't y'all use dirty water, and why does it have to inflict so much damage on everyone's energy bill? Like, so while on one hand it's allowing folks to have this sense of, okay, I don't have to have a PhD in energy. On the other hand, it's like, is this the cause of the energy spike? Like, how do folks make sense of that?
Yeah, right. Sometimes the things that are causing the problem also pose the solution, and
Right,
sometimes the
right.
opposite. Right. In this case, the reality is AI and these big hyperscale data centers. I think there was a water issue.
Mm,
Now these things don't completely suck up everything anymore. They went from more of an open loop cooling system
okay,
to now everything's closed loop. So most of these things now sip water because of that issue. So that's the
right,
thing. These things innovate very quickly.
for sure.
But it's the legacy data centers from like 5, 6, 7 years ago that are still sucking communities
Got
dry
you.
from a water perspective. On the energy side, the reality is utilities haven't had to invest in their grid infrastructure, in their transmission and distribution,
Yeah.
substations, all the things in those pipes and wires
Mm.
that allow you to actually, efficiently provide electrons to your customers. They haven't
Right.
done anything in decades. So, the reality there is hyperscalers and AI, it's getting conveniently blamed for a lot of the lag that
Sure.
utilities didn't have the foresight to do when they should have done it.
Right.
And monopolies, unless they're pushed, often don't do the right things.
Yeah, why would they
for
need
their
to?
customers. Exactly. Because
Yeah.
everyone sits, they get their pensions, that they spend 40 years in a job, and
Yeah.
then they're out. Now everyone's being forced to innovate. And most of the big hyperscalers now, because of the perception that they're putting too much burden on the grid, they're all coming in with their own generation systems. So
Okay.
that's the world we live in. They're doing
Right.
things like geothermal. They're doing things like big gas turbines, which is effectively dropping a 747 engine or like a massive marine engine on
Right.
a plot of land and burning gas.
Yeah.
You've got small modular reactors and nuclear coming out. So big batteries and STATCOM systems, it's all jargon, but the reality is like everyone's moving towards this idea of energy democratization where it's going to be on site. It's
Yeah.
produced at the point where it's being used,
Right.
and anything generated in excess then can go to the grid and get exported for added benefit. The reality is like when you look at kind of the future of all of this, there's no choice but to have energy abundance because our dependency on all the technologies, the
Right.
data, we'll get into a little more of it as we go, but
Sure.
there's just so much that's completely dependent on these systems,
Mhm.
and it's accretive, it snowballs, and energy. We'll get into it.
Yeah. Too much riding on it for it to just be ignored, essentially.
And too many fundamental processes in our economy to just solve it, by sipping a little less. We're going to have to
Sure.
generate it clean, and we're going to have to generate it abundantly.
I hear that absolutely. I'm thinking about the ways in which Hurricane Sandy happening back in 2012 impacted your view on this and led to you founding Grid Market. I'm thinking particularly about the blackout then, and maybe even thinking about the blackout that we experienced back in what was that summer 2003 or 2004,
Yeah.
whatever it was. I think 2003.
Yeah.
How does that traditional grid still look as vulnerable as you've already discussed today, or have we made enough fundamental changes to how we build for resilience?
The reality is when those kinds of big disasters take place, everyone does a little bit. Oftentimes there's one missing link or missing element that throws the whole system off.
Sure.
And everyone tries to figure out how to, unbury from it after. And when you look at Hurricane Sandy, just things from previous blackouts and previous flooding events that people did that still failed, you had people who learned from previous flooding in hospitals, for instance, along the East River. They decided to put their backup generators a floor or two up. So they all went on the second or third floor, so it wouldn't be
Gotcha.
knocked out by flooding.
Right.
They didn't keep them up, so the O&M was bad. They didn't have diesel in these things, so
Gotcha.
flooding happened, and they still needed to bring everyone down on crash carts and on gurneys down the stairs.
Okay.
So they still make those mistakes.
Right.
And that's the story of all of this. We're doing we're running the energy transition for the government of Dutch St. Martin, and they had the foresight to bury all their power lines, which is like, hey, so another hurricane like Irma comes and our power lines are buried. However, all their generation systems, so they have these big heavy fuel generators that because it's easy to get shipments, they sit on the beach. So a storm comes, they get knocked out, they get flooded out. So nice that they buried their lines, but the power still all goes out, right?
Exactly.
But everyone solves a little bit, but not everything. That's the problem, and you really have to look at everything holistically as a large system in order to make it work. So, Hurricane Sandy was definitely a wake-up call for everyone, and we launched out of a partnership that was really focused on bringing this concept of self-generation and on-site generation to New York, and then expanding beyond. The first big project that we did in the wake of that was actually at a namesake of your boy. It was Marcus Garvey Village
That's
in
right.
Brownsville.
Uh-huh.
And we took 6 city blocks basically off grid with a combination of fuel cells, a giant battery, and then solar power on 6 city blocks on these rooftops.
Right.
And that was the most vulnerable blackout, prone part of the grid. So like where power always cycles out, they're paying huge amounts for demand spikes. And this is great. It's like add resilience, make sure it stays up when the grid goes down, smooth out bad power, save money, and do it cleanly. So it's there's that triple threat that we're typically going for. But that was like one of our first launchpad projects that came in the wake of the hurricane.
Oh, for sure. And I love that you're talking about it in that way, because to your point, especially when you're dealing with like bureaucracies and governments, there is the sort of erring on the side of like incremental progress. But whenever there's situations that are drastic, or particularly even think about like under resourced spaces where it's like, no, we can't do this incrementally because they're already a generation or two behind, and just thinking about the ways in which innovation can help catch people up.
Well, and the natural disaster stuff got us moving, and some people responded to it. But the sad and interesting thing about all of this is natural disasters, people close their eyes, and a year later they forget that they happened.
Of course.
And they still gravitate towards those incremental changes you're talking about. Things go too slow. This AI hyperscaler issue in the energy world, that's the only thing that's now pushing the grid towards modernization and moving things in a non-incremental fashion. So it's in the US, everything's money motivated, right?
Oh,
so like that's so now that there's a big financial kind of both opportunity and cost center that's sitting here, it's getting attention and everyone's modernizing. But a network of outages or like a bunch of outages, bunch of hurricanes, but we have amnesia after a year.
Yeah, that's so real though. That is tremendously real. I'm just thinking about the ways in which you've talked about the future being a future where energy will be clean, resilient, abundant, and free. And I can understand almost hearing that sort of like Wallace and Gromit in the crowd being like, free? That's impossible. How do we get from today's reality of high utility bills and failing infrastructure to a world where energy is essentially a marginal cost zero commodity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we are in we're in a technology growth period that, it's only going to get crazier from here. If you look at what we could have done on the energy front over the last, call it 60 years versus what we've actually done, we've treated our energy infrastructure like it's a 1930s, 1940s grid and system.
Come on.
In the 50s and 60s, the Navy put pretty much every major asset on nuclear. So aircraft carriers, submarines. People talk about small modular reactors, SMRs, as basically like a new thing. The Navy's been doing it very successfully for decades, right?
Yeah.
You've got these aircraft carriers that are moving cities, right? Their theoretical maximum speed is classified and like limited by the integrity of the hull, not the power of like the nuclear reactor on its butt, right? So if we've had that technology be so good for so long and be able to provide really abundant energy for a city for that amount of time, the only thing standing in one's way at that point is like politics and perception.
For sure.
So nuclear is not going to dominate everything. Solar is going to continue to become incredibly cheap. Batteries, like the ways to store it as well, incredibly cheap. Geothermal technology, as people are transitioning over from like oil drilling to really going 5,000 feet into the ground to dig geothermal wells. It's a huge opportunity in this country too. And, it's not the cleanest, but we have an abundance of gas in this country as well and in the Gulf. So energy already is abundant. It's about capturing and storing it. And it's about using it intelligently in the right geographies. If we do very little, we're basically going to have nuclear abundance for energy in the next few decades.
Wow.
And what that means is, 50 megawatt small modular reactors, thousands of them all over the country, producing what will eventually be an almost zero cost for energy. It's not going to be worth charging customers for it.
Right.
It's going to be amortized into the goods or the data that they're selling because it's going to be so cheap. So when you look at how that's eventually abundant and free, we've got this big snowball effect where everything we do is so energy dependent, everything we do is so data dependent and AI dependent, and then our standards of life are going to increase, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you and I'm going somewhere with this, but just when we look at that spiral, people say, like, is this AI stuff a bubble? The reality is, like, let's say all of a sudden we're able to do all of our medical diagnostics now with AI, and you can't have any latency, and you need your result now.
Right.
Then next phase, robots are doing all your surgeries, and instead of a 0.01% error rate, it's down to 0.0001%.
Right.
As these things cascade, our expectations of longevity, how long we're going to live, our risks going into surgeries and procedures or medical stuff, and like, this is across every industry, right? It's the same thing for industrial manufacturing. How many errors are we going to have when we produce something? It's going to ultimately go down to zero, or as close to zero as possible, because it's going to be machine dominated. So the more dependency we have on that, the more we have to feed our data centers, and the more we have to, like, feed these gigantic factories, the more we're going to be producing, which means the more electrons we're going to need to generate.
Right.
So when you look at all of that data, all that manufacturing, the best thing for people, and this is controversial for sure, but the best thing for people is if these hyperscalers, so like the Metas and Microsofts and Googles and AWSs and Oracles and OpenAIs, if they're building huge data centers and the economy and our safety is getting so much better because of all these things, they have these cities that are utilizing energy. They have to generate it as cheaply as possible. They're going to be able to give it away for free to you and me as residential consumers or small business consumers.
Right.
So basically, it's going to get bigger. The demand is going through the roof. And the only way it works, and the only way it doesn't kind of kill everything, is if this basically becomes free for the masses. So that's why I think it's going to go that way.
I mean, I love this articulation of it, because I think I see the benefits in how you're describing it. I'm just so cynical about the amount of greed that exists in our society, and it's a allergy to the word enough. You know what I mean? So it's like while you're saying this and describing a world of a just world, frankly, I'm also seeing someone who I can also imagine someone who could hear all that you're describing, that sort of power, and be like, here's how I become a trillionaire. You know what I mean? Like, I just see
100%. Well, and here's the nuance. I think it's above my pay grade to say whether the result of all of that will be a just world, or whether or whether these things will ultimately be good for us as a society. Like, I don't know, right? I just know where it's going, right? Like, there's a part of me that when I was younger, I had this idea of opening a bar called Edison's Mistake, where there's no electricity, everything's candlelight, and you're like chipping ice off of blocks. And there's something nice about having no lights on and being able to see the stars. Like, are we better as humans because we'll have electricity abundance and we are making all these things, and because we're going to go to space and produce infinite goods?
Right.
I don't know that we're better off, but it's where society's going. So,
Yeah. I think it's nice to have the luxury of saying, I want to turn the lights off, rather than like being in a situation where I can't turn the lights on. I hear that though.
No, it's very true. I mean, we are absolutely accustomed to creature comforts and everything. And it goes back to the point I was making before. Like, in our current world, we have standards. Like, a lot of our electrical grids power our water infrastructure. So water goes out, or electricity goes out, power grids go out, and in a lot of places in the US, you can't get water. LA has the most energy intensive water in the country. It has to get trucked over. It has to get piped over mountains. So there are things like that are basic. Then things like air conditioning, right? We have all these people living in the Southeast, right? And the Southwest, which is even more unforgiving from a climate perspective. And like, your AC goes out, it's a problem. Buffalo invented the air conditioner, the city, and then killed their own economy and city because everyone stopped going to Buffalo for the summer for Denver climate. God. So, it's interesting. It's like, in these industries,
Uh,
I was very idealistic when I was younger, but and
sure.
I believe in a lot of these things. I want energy to go clean. I want as much preservation of our natural environment as possible.
Yeah.
It's hard to always swim upstream like a salmon when the economy is going one way. When do you swim with it?
Yeah. No, that's the difficulty in terms of learning how to balance the innovation that's attached to idealism with the pragmatism that kind of keeps us grounded. That's the leader's dilemma, you know.
Exactly. And, I think that touches on a lot of the work that you do, right? You have to keep us grounded in both the spiritual world and in the moral world, as we're
100%.
in this perpetual battle to figure out how to survive in what's more of like this economically driven crazy world. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah. No, but it's funny you bring that up because we're recording this the day after Martin Luther King Day, and so much of what you were describing with the advancements in energy makes me think about him talking about universal basic income back in the '60s, right? So if
Yeah.
we get to this point where if even surgeries are going to be performed well by robots, like what does that mean for the human condition? What are we going to do? We can't just say everyone's out of a job. What does it mean for us to still flourish? Because so much of our understanding of flourishing is still attached to I have this job, but what does it mean if we don't need to have that job? Can we still flourish?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an existential question. And I forget who had the quote, but a few years ago when ChatGPT and everything was
Right.
was really taking off, there was that quote that was like, I want robots that can clean up and do my laundry and dishes so I can make art and music, not
Yes.
robots that make art
Inverse.
and music while I clean up.
That's
And
right. That's right.
I think physical AI is going to help,
Yeah.
from like, they're going to help kind of perform some of the menial tasks so we can do other things. But like,
Sure.
I don't know, everyone's kind of ripcord dream of going and like writing a novel on the beach or,
Right.
making music, in their
Yeah.
retirement or getting to the next like kind of It's like the AI does it real well now. It's kind of
It's
scary.
scary.
So
It's
what do we do
scary.
with our time? And I
Right.
think we've been through these processes before, right? Like we went through industrialization
Mm,
thousands and thousands of years before that. We went through the agricultural revolution,
for sure.
right? We were hunter gatherers, then people started farming, and
Right.
everyone thought that these would materially change the world, and they did.
Yeah.
The question is, now that we have all of these things that we can use at our service, basically, like, are we able to operate more efficiently? Can we produce more? Can we finally go to the stars? Are we all going to be flying around on our own AI powered aircrafts?
Right.
Is it going to move this quickly? Are we finally going to have flying cars? These are cool
Right.
things to think about, but then we get into kind of the ethical questions that are going to be more in your territory to answer, which is exciting too, which is
Yeah.
what happens when these things are these things ultimately sentient, and how do we treat them? Right.
That's
Like,
it. Right.
is an AI robot like, where's the God particle there? It's scary to
Right.
think about, right?
That's it. What is a soul? Like, does it have a soul? And even with you talking about the flying cars and all that bit, I heard another theologian recently talk about who was living below the Jetsons. If you remember the cartoon, the Jetsons all lived in the sky. Like, but who was on the ground? Like, what kind
It's a scary thought, right? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
That's
so,
right.
so talking a bit about some of your land and expand work, and this model that you recently highlighted for Fortune 500 companies. In your estimation, Nick, why is that first project always the hardest, and how is Grid Market shortening that pilot to portfolio gap for companies?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a good question for the business, right? So the reality is doing anything for the first time is a challenge, and big corporations often do things for the first time terribly. So they are a living, breathing bureaucratic organism in a lot of cases, and unless you're with a really special group that can cut through a lot of that red tape, you're going through a million checks and balances. It's very efficient. It can be as difficult as getting something through Congress, and I mean it, right? It's you've got people in the middle to convince initially. Then you've got like the very well-meaning people that are in some cases keeping their facilities energy systems together by a thread, because like the grid, those systems haven't gotten budget or been upgraded for a dozen years or 2 dozen
Sure.
years, right? So they've got a hard job. And then you've got the people that are a little bit removed that are trying to help them get budget and do these kinds of projects. Then it floats up to corporate mandates from boards that say, hey, do some sustainability pilots, do some solar projects. We've got a mandate, go renewable. And then it flows down and everyone has to figure out what to do. So, these projects are complex sometimes, especially the first few. You have to get your head around contracting. You have to get your head around the engineering. You have to get your head around these things living at your facility for 20 years, because that's how long a lot of them last, maybe even longer,
Right.
20, 30, 35 years. It's a long-term commitment. So once you get through that once, it's hard to say I'm never doing that again. You want to institutionalize it and have a protocol for replicating it. And then after you do the one, do the next 5. After you do the next 5, do the next 100. So we like to work with these big portfolios that have dozens, if not thousands, of facilities in certain cases. And it's why we like to work with whole countries in certain cases.
Right.
Because we can pretty much, all that institutional knowledge, the approvals, the protocols, the learnings, we can do that real kind of hardship once and then quickly scale across the rest of the country, portfolio, territory, et cetera.
For sure. Just jumping to your work with nations, you've been deeply involved in transitioning the Republic of Palau to renewables. So, you're based in New York. What can another New York business, perhaps like a commercial real estate owner, learn from your work with a microgrid project on a Pacific island? Because I'm, thinking about all the sort of like skepticism, like, oh, how does that translate? Like, how would you articulate the ways in which it translates?
Yeah, I think we're all in this connected world and we all are dealing with a lot of the same problems, right? Yeah. Whether you're, a building or a city block or a neighborhood in Brooklyn or Tokyo, or whether you are, a nation of 20,000 in the Pacific. At the end of the day, your people have power outages sometimes. People are paying too much for their electricity. People are at the mercy of utilities or importing, if you're out in the Pacific, you're importing a lot of diesel. And then you're reliant on other nations to set prices for you and to deliver everything timely. And then your utilities have to store it, right? So, what I've learned most in all of this is it's all the same everywhere. You might have different energy sources everywhere, but we're all dealing with a lot of the same problems. The things look different in different parts of the world, of course. But at the end of the day, we're trying to survive. We need power to talk to our families, to get connected for work. We, to watch the, local sports team play.
Right.
And we're being charged too much for it in a lot of cases. And the quality isn't perfect. It's not always on. So if that's the recipe, and you could look at this across all industries. Like if you're a housing developer, you can look anywhere on a map and be like, hey, in the Pacific, housing affordability is also a huge problem, especially in these relatively high income nations like, Palau, Samoa, Tonga. These aren't poor countries. They're like, they have affordability issues. Everything's imported in. So whether you're like an import-export business, a food business, an agricultural business who can go in with vertical farms and start growing for locals, investing in locals to do it themselves, which is the best thing you can do. There's or a real estate developer who can come in and help, solve a housing crisis. At the end of the day, like everyone's trying to solve the same challenges. We had an interesting partnership with the UN. They brought us into a lot of these places in order to expand capacity, and just help them be able to kind of self-perform and do their own energy work and really support them with our platform. And, that's a lot of fun. But it's not rocket science. If you're willing to have an open conversation with either like government officials or people on the ground, you're going to fall into opportunity.
Right. What sort of soft costs and energy projects are you most obsessed with killing right now. You're thinking about your move away from traditional consulting toward this AI driven marketplace you've described. Like what are those soft costs you're like, we need to just cut this fat?
Yeah. So when you look at what goes into a project, I think the might be even more now, but it's probably around 50-50 at this point, where 50% of getting a project installed is the actual, call it, hardware. So
Yeah.
big battery packs, solar modules, getting that stuff installed. Then half of it, and for some technologies even more, is the process of getting it engineered and permitted, paying various fees to interconnect it, paying the utility to basically paying them a ransom in order to get the ability to connect, whether you're like exporting it onto their grid or not. A lot of the time they can regulate whatever you do. Paying lawyers for contract negotiations, paying consultants to do all the design work and to tell you that it's going to save the amount of carbon that you want it to save, or that it's going to save the amount of money you're going to save. Most of those processes can, frankly, at this point, be automated. So what we're trying to do is compress things as close to the cost of installing the hardware as possible, so more people can do it, right? Like turn on-site energy into effectively a commodity through automation, and make sure that the price is actually the price. People aren't paying a premium for, what they don't need to pay for. They've got templated contracts so they can skip legal. They've got, automated design by just clicking on a building using a platform, like something that looks like a Zillow. You click on a building, it tells you exactly how much to install where. Those are all the kinds of things that help us skip a few steps and help make these things cheaper, makes it more accessible for everyone. And the nice thing about a lot of these assets, things like geothermal, things like solar, even nuclear, right? Like these are perpetually generating technologies. So once you put your initial investment in, these things produce electricity without an input cost, aside from some operations and maintenance. They produce electricity for the next 25 years after it pays you back.
I'm thinking about the ways in which, this work can sort of, do what, I read that one prime minister, for example, had asked for a bid process to take months, not years. And just the ways in which we want speed and something that's been so much of a laborious process for people. I'm thinking also about the ways in which, because people want that speed, there also can be blind spots, particularly about their own building owners' own property energy potential. So, in what ways have you encountered these blind spots and tried to work with clients to sort of say, okay, I know you want this done quickly, but here's something you need to pay attention to?
Yeah, this is kind of this is a classic example of something that the machine does better than the people.
Yes.
So from a talking about kind of even machine learning and AI in its earlier forms, in order to kind of ferret out exactly what kind of energy projects could be identified at a building, what the sizings should be, ancillary opportunities, turning over every stone to make sure it's optimized. That's something that we've been very good at for like a decade. What we are less good at, and what customers are less good at, is emotionally detaching from, their perception of a particular technology or a path. So when it comes to like recommendations and forecasting what's going to happen with the grid, the machines typically get it right. But then you'll have people that get it wrong. You'll have someone who says, hey, I only want a gas burning system here. And you'll say, well, you're in a perfect place to throw a solar module on the roof and have a battery manage the power. You'll have a payback in under a year, and then you basically have free energy for the next 30 years. And they'll say, I heard that having a solar panel on your roof could fry your brain, right? It's like, oh, well, where did you hear that? I don't know. My cousin told me, right? So it becomes more emotional. Or someone will say, well, there was a fire 15 years ago at some facility. So I'd rather like not do X. And then you'd say, well, do you know how many boiler fires there are like every year? How many gas fires there are in such and such a place? And they'll be like, well, I didn't see it on the news most recently, so it can't be true. So let me not do this. So the machines get it right. If you set them right, they'll tell you what's the safest, what's the cheapest, how to optimize. They'll tell you what technology to install. Like we've had all those things doing very well for quite a while. It's whether people trust it and what they implement.
And that reminds me of, you mentioning earlier that you position Grid Market as something that's like technology agnostic. How do you encourage people to be detached from those things? Because I think about you trying to convince someone to use, solar power versus more traditional, like, dirtier sources of energy. There's so much skepticism about expertise, and there's so much, like my cousin heard, I saw on the news, I saw on social media. How are you working with folks to sort of break through those sorts of stigmas and suspicions?
Yeah, it's I think the human aspect to dialogue, right? You can get an objective truth from a machine. At the end of the day, people want to know that you're empathizing with them or sympathizing,
sure.
that you understand what they're talking about. And I mean, I've been doing this business for like almost 15 years at this point, maybe more. I don't think anyone has made an objective, rational decision on choosing what types of energy they install from our recommendations. I don't think there's one customer that said, yes, let's do these 10 things. They always picked from the menu because of a variety of subjective reasons. So all we can do is give them the menu and give them the objective facts and tell them we understand, even sometimes when we don't. But at the end of the day, people pick from a menu, and no one ever picks right. No one ever picks 100% right. But we always tell them what's right.
Right. I hear that.
That's all you can do is be you can be a guide, right?
That's it. Because people have agency and people are going to do what they want to do. That's something I see on my side of the street as well.
Of course. Right? I'm sure people pick the things that they want in everything.
100%. Exactly. When you think about legacy, and project pipeline of billions of dollars on your platform, what is that one metric, obviously besides revenue, that you track to know if Grid Market is actually winning the fight against climate change? This is something where I imagine it sometimes feels like you're swimming upstream with the ways in which there's going against a ton of skepticism and political forces. What's that metric that lets you know, okay, today was a good day or this was a good month in our fight?
There are so many objective ways to qualify it. It's the amount of the amount of carbon that you offset, the amount of resilience even that you bring, because the thing we've always liked to do is the mitigation is when you're kind of installing technologies or removing carbon, but then adaptation is how do we if we've got a world with more weather intensification, if we've got more power outages because our grid is failing, how do we make sure that people have the bare necessities and have uptime? So sometimes we measure things in, is it 5 nines resilient? So is your power going to be on 99.999% of the time because we installed systems that allow you to more efficiently manage your energy? So that there are those kinds of metrics. At the end of the day, it comes down to subjective truth. What matters is if you get a successful deal done, people are happy, your partners get promoted because it worked out well. Right. People feel good because they saved money, or if someone says thank you because you helped their business out or you helped them personally. Right. That's it's what matters in the end. It's the human element. So.
Yeah, no, I hear that for sure. And it's such a comforting thing to know that at the end of the day, like, we're still always talking about people, and that's something that, whether you're talking about theology, politics, or business, you're always engaging with people. There's always a human element that has to be respected, if not honored and cherished.
And when it's lost, that's when everything goes awry. So that'll be the most, interesting thing as kind of AI goes everywhere is how to, how to maintain that level of humanity and foster those levels of connection when so much is going to be automated. And
Right.
we've already done this vast trial run with like social media and everything to see how bad things can get when people are like sitting behind a screen, not
For
interacting
sure.
with face, right? Like people will say anything to each other. They'll be
Oh.
nasty. Everything gets politicized. You have
Yes.
bots that are fighting humans and bots that are
Yes.
fighting bots and humans that are on the sideline saying what's going on.
Right.
We need to figure out how to preserve those elements even as we draft on the benefits of AI, right? Like
Totally.
having robotic surgery with 0% fail rates,
Right.
smaller, that's great. Being able to, have a robot take us up into the air like Star Wars, like that'd be great too. On the other
Right.
hand, if we're all sitting in our own little Wally bubbles,
Oh.
then that's going to be a pretty horrible way to live.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's going to be important that we continue to understand exactly what it means for us to flourish, what it means for us
Yep.
to live abundantly. Now, I definitely hear that for sure. What is one upcoming project or even your outlook of the next year to 18 months that gets you excited? Something that you're looking forward to with Grid Market?
We're digging really deep into trying to solve these data center issues and to try to make the cleanest powered data centers possible. So we've got some announcements coming up where we're storing the carbon and putting them through pipelines to be used in industrial processes that's being generated kind of as byproduct from some of these data centers, making sure that these data centers sip water. So that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
The other big project that I'm working on now is a fleet robotics project where we've got drone dogs and self-launching UAVs, so drones that can do a level of predictive maintenance on projects, can do a level of security, drone dogs with robotic arms that can do maintenance. And really the purpose here is when you look at kind of the existing applications on the maintenance side, there are jobs that aren't that pleasant for people to do, like changing a filter out every 10 hours or something on a turbine or some kind of unit. But then there are dangerous things like arc flash, where there can be giant electrical surges that put people at risk and can kill them.
Yeah.
You eliminate that, and those are kind of perfect jobs for a sentient machine to do, especially if, so there are those aspects. And what I'm building towards is that future where there are thousands of small modular reactors all over the country. I mean, I've been to a bunch of nuclear facilities. There are a lot of people walking around with machine guns, and there are people that are handling sensitive materials.
Yeah.
And, that should be done in a way that, you don't have much radiation risk or
Right.
There's reduced risk if it's a droid doing it. So we've built a few, we've got a few, and we're deploying a bunch. And that's kind of another exciting project, seeing how this all translates to physical AI.
I mean, I will, on road trips, whether it's like, seeing a bunch of power lines and just like all the things, like passing different factories, and you're just like, my goodness, the level of danger that all of these different essential roles, like not jobs that you can just give to anyone, but essential roles you have to have so much training, hours and hours of training to do. These are the sorts of things that I would love to see AI and sentient robots be able to interrupt the disaster of humans being injured or hurt, while still allowing those people to have an income in a way in which that they can make a living. I think that is exciting work for sure.
Absolutely. And we're going to need more people managing energy systems because they're going to be more distributed, right? Instead of the hundreds in an area, there are going to be thousands, and all that infrastructure is going to continue to get spread out because it's a more efficient way to do it. You need some people doing it, and you can have more and more and more of those things if those people have fleets of robotics that are helping them out.
Absolutely. But this is exciting work and exciting times, man. And just thank you so much for coming and breaking it down for us. And, we're just trying to keep up with all that's going on. I'm talking to folks about AI, and I'm like, look, it's changing every day. What I knew is now outdated. You know what I mean? So thank you for sharing your expertise.
No, of course. And, I think that the beauty of all of this is no one's an expert in any of it. It's changing so quickly that we're all flying by the seat of our pants, doing our best. And, hopefully what doesn't get lost in all of it, which was our theme here, I think today, is the humanity behind it, because that's what matters. Why have any of it if we're not fostering interactions and being human? So
100%, 100%. And you all can learn more and more about what Nick and Grid Market are doing at gridmarket.com. But just want to thank y'all so much for being with us. As always, we're doing this on a regularity Tuesdays on LinkedIn. You can go to YouTube at Baddest Chaplain, baddestchaplain.com. And even if you are on Twitch, I'm trying to figure out, I was saying to Nick earlier, trying to figure out how to bring this whole love of neighbor into the gamer space with Twitch. So I'm not good at the games as I used to be, but I still want to at least have a space there to let y'all know what's going on. But much love to y'all as always. And until next time, be kind to somebody for